The world once breathed to the slow, untamed rhythm of the sun and the changing seasons, a time when the hours were wide, generous, and measured only by the lengthening of shadows across a field. But as the 19th century dawned, a quiet revolution was forged in brass, silver, infinite steel, compressing the infinite sky into the steady, unyielding tick of a pocket watch. This is the story of how humanity surrendered its ancient lazy mornings to the absolute discipline of the minute hand, transforming a delicate piece of jewelry into the ultimate tool of modern order and social power. Hey friend, welcome back to this quiet space. Go ahead and adjust your pillow now. Find that perfect, comfortable spot where your shoulders can finally drop. Pull that blanket just a little closer around you, letting its familiar warmth hold you safe and still against the dark. There is absolutely nothing else you need to do tonight, nowhere else you need to be, and no schedules you have to keep. Tonight we are leaving the rushing modern world behind, to journey back to the damp cobblestone streets of England in the year nineteenth. The ball, a world caught between the ancient mist of the countryside and the glowing fires of the new industrial age. As we begin our journey together into the gentle landscape of the past, please know of creative historical narrative, constructed solely for entertainment, relaxation and educational purposes. While every detail is rooted in verified archives, certain scenes and atmospheres have been textually reimagined to provide most immersive, calming, auditory experience possible. Let your breath slow down now, in and out, as we listen to the quiet whispers of the past. Long before the iron tracks of the steam locomotives carved their sharp, dark lines across the green topography of the British countryside, a different kind of time ruled over the daily existence of the common people. This was a temporal order deeply tied to the land, an organic concept often referred to by natural chroniclers as natural time or the time of God. In the early decades of the 19th century, if one were to wander through the quiet, sweeping valleys of Wiltshire or the heavy farmlands of Yorkshire, the idea of an hour as a rigid, standardized unit containing exactly 60 minutes did not exist in the minds of the peasantry. Time was not an invisible tyrant ruling from a mechanical dial, but an experiential presence that shifted, expanded, and contracted depending entirely upon the physical realities of the earth and the sky. The human body moved in perfect synchronization with these natural cycles, possessing an innate understanding of the day-s progression that required no external validation from a ticking mechanism. A farmer did not wake because an artificial alarm sounded at a predetermined numerical index. He woke because the deep, heavy charcoal grey of the night sky began to dissolve into a pale, translucent silver along the eastern horizon. The waking world returned to him not through a sudden jarring disruption, but through a slow, predictable accumulation of sensory markers, the gradual lifting of the morning mist from the low-lying clover fields, the cold sharpness of the air against the skin, and the distant, territorial call of a rooster echoing across neighbouring stone walls. This pre-industrial existence was defined by its remarkable flexibility, a comforting lack of precision that allowed the human grounded in the physical present without the constant underlying anxiety of efficiency. Labour was measured not by the steady consumption of minutes, but by the tangible pletion and animal tasks, and the endurance of human and animal muscle. A team of labourers would work a field of barley until the heavy cart horses grew too lathered with sweat to pull the plough, or until the ambient light grew too dim to safely distinguish the crop from the weeds. The midday meal was not dictated by a factory bell striking 12, but by the physical sensation of hunger, and the position of the sun as it reached its highest, most brilliant point in the great blue vault overhead. If two neighbours agreed to meet at the boundary stone near the ancient oak tree to discuss the sale of a calf, the agreement was understood to be broad and patient. They would meet in the afternoon, a vast stretch of time that encompassed the fading of the midday heat and the lengthening of the first long shadows across the pasture. There was a profound, unhurried wisdom in this ancient way of living, a recognition that human behaviour should remain subservient to the grand, immutable laws of nature, rather than an artificial rhythm created by human hands. Time was viewed as a gentle, repetitive circle, a continuous loop of sunrise and sunset, sowing and reaping, birth and rest, and within that grand circle, the mind found a natural sanctuary from the frantic pressures of modern accumulation. This organic perception of the day was not merely a lifestyle choice. It was the foundational architecture of the entire social and economic order. In this older world, communities operated on what was historically documented as task orientation, as a system where work and life were so thoroughly woven together that it was impossible to separate them. A weaver working from a small stone cottage in Gloucestershire, for instance, did not view his day as a battle against a clock, but as a series of natural rhythms dictated by the physical qualities of his materials. He would throw the shuttle through the loom for a few hours, then step outside into his small garden patch, watch the flight of a bumblebee over the hedge, or share a slow cup of ale with a passing traveller. The pace of production was entirely personal, fluctuating naturally, according to the weaver's energy, the clarity of the daylight, or the simple desire for rest. There was no concept of a timesheet, no supervisor measuring the output of a jhat hour, and no invisible ledger of a moment spent in quiet contemplation. The value of a day's work was judged solely by the quality of the finished cloth, not by the frantic speed at which it was completed. This lack of artificial pressure kept the mind remarkably free from the chronic underlying stress that characterizes the modern working world, allowing human beings to maintain a sense of genuine ownership over their own labor and their own lives. As you rest here in the stillness of tonight, you can feel the deep comfort of that old world, knowing that the channel you are listening to right now, Whispers of Centuries, is dedicated to helping you reclaim that very same unhurried peace. If you find comfort in these quiet journeys into the past, you might consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this video, a simple way to ensure this peaceful sanctuary is always here waiting for you whenever the world grows too loud. Let your mind drift back into that quiet landscape now, imagining the soft texture of a world without deadlines. Even the small parish churches that stood at the centre of these rural communities measured the hours with a generous, indifferent shrug. The church sundial, carved directly into the weathered stone the south wall and covered in patches of greenness of the sun to cast a shadow, was entirely dependent on the willingness of the sun to cast a shadow. On the frequent grey, overcast days so characteristic of the British climate, the sundial simply ceased to function, and the village would happily continue its existence without knowing the exact hour for days at a time. It was an era where human existence was permitted to be beautifully, comfortably imprecise, a time when the soul was allowed to rest in the quiet space between the hours, untouched by the relentless demand for constant, unyielding progress. To live within this natural framework meant that the human understanding of time changed dramatically from one season to the next, adapting seamlessly to the deep, slow breathing of the earth. During the long, dark stretch of the English winter, when the cold northern winds swept through the bare branches of the elms and buried the lanes in deep drifts of snow, the daylight hours shrunk down to a precious few. The community did not attempt to fight this contraction with artificial schedules. Instead, they simply allowed their lives to slow down to match the hibernation of the fields. Families gathered early around the stone hearths, their evenings lit only by the soft, flickering orange glow of a tallow candle or the steady burning of a dry oak log. Work was confined to the essential tasks of feeding the livestock and mending tools by the fireside, while the mind was permitted to drift into a long, restorative quietude that lasted until the spring. When the seasons turned and the golden light of midsummer arrived, the days stretched out into wide, endless twilights that lasted until nearly midnight. Labourers spent these long evenings lazily, turning the sweet-smelling hay in the meadows, or sitting on benches outside the village inn, talking in low, murmured voices as the sky slowly turned from blue to a deep royal purple. There was no sense of guilt about this seasonal shift, no feeling that a winter hour was less productive or less valuable than a summer hour. Time was viewed as a rich, shared resource that belonged to everyone, an infinite river that flowed around the community rather than a scarce commodity that had to be saved, spent, or managed. This complete lack of rigid structures meant that the collective mental landscape of the pre-industrial era was entirely free from the modern concept of punctuality. Archival records from the period reveal that meetings, markets, and social gatherings were arranged with a grand, sweeping disregard for minutes. A fair would begin when the farmers had all managed to herd their sheep into the wooden pens. A church service would commence when the parson walked through the cemetery gates, regardless of whether the heavy iron bells had rung at the official hour. Human beings were not expected to alter their natural pace to fit a mechanical matrix. Rather, the few primitive clocks that did exist were expected to conform to the organic reality of human life. In many small towns, the clock on the public house or the town hall was intentionally set 15 or 20 minutes, fast or slow, depending entirely on the whim of the keeper or the physical expansion of the metal gears. In the summer heat, this variance caused no distress and triggered no complaints, because everyone understood that life was far too complex to be confined within the narrow, unyielding lines of an absolute measurement. The mind was allowed to remain unhurried, resting deeply in the comfort of a world that understood that the true value of an experience could never be captured by the sterile movement of a pointer or a painted face. Across a paint, this profound tranquility, rooted in the seasonal co-regulation of human life and the natural world, fostered a unique psychological resilience among the population. Because the hours were not commercialized, the deep-seated urge to constantly maximize output was entirely absent from the common consciousness. Social interactions were characterized by a genuine, unhurried presence. A conversation between two acquaintance farmers across a wooden fence was not cut short by the consulting of a watch or the looming pressure of a next appointment. If a storm rolled in from the Atlantic, darkening the sky and soaking the fields with a sudden, torrential downpour, the labourers did not panic or fret over lost wages. They simply retreated beneath the broad canopy of an ancient barn, sat down upon bundles of dry, fragrant straw, and waited for the weather to pass, their minds resting in the absolute acceptance of nature as supremacy. This lack of temporal structure meant that the human nervous system was not subjected to low-grade alarm that defines the modern era. There was no internal voice whispering that one was falling behind, because there was no finish line to cross, no quotas to meet, and no artificial standard against which a person's worth could be measured. As you allow yourself to sink further into the deep safety of your bed tonight, you can feel the heavy, comforting truth of this ancient perspective. The rigid, demanding expectations of the modern calendar have completely dissolved in this quiet room, leaving only the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. No, in that older world, even the language used to describe the passage of the day reflected this beautifully loose, sensory-based relationship with existence. People did not speak of numerical intervals like 3:15 or 5 to 6. Instead, they referred to the milking time, the candle lighting, or the hour when the bats begin to flutter around the old stone barn. It was a vocabulary entirely derived from lived experience, an understanding of existence that prioritizes the physical reality of the body and its environment, the abstract demands of a machine. This organic harmony created a mental buffer, protecting the human spirit from the exhausting fragmentation that occurs when life is forced to adapt to a sterile mathematical grid. It was a time when the human soul was permitted to occupy its days fully and deeply, within a generous, unbounded ocean of moments that seemed to stretch out into eternity. Skis. Yet, beneath this vast, unhurried sky, the first faint gears of a monumental transformation were already beginning to turn in the dark, smoky heartlands of the industrial north. By the late nineteenth balmy gay, the ancient, quiet isolation of the English countryside was being systematically punctured, terrifying new force. The arrival of the steam engine and the rapid extension of the great iron railways, as these massive black iron locomotives began to roar across the quiet valleys, trailing thick clouds of dark coal smoke behind them, they brought more than just iron and fire. They brought an immediate existential threat to the loose, disorganized time of the old world. For the first time in human history, the casual sun-based variants of local towns became an impossible hazard. A train leaving London at a specific hour, according to the capital S sundial, would arrive in Bristol only to fall 15 minutes behind, with 10 or 15 min. A terrifying discrepancy that could easily result in catastrophic, head-on collisions on the single-track lines. The modern world was suddenly confronted, at a desperate, absolute need for a unified mechanical consciousness, an administrative order that could bind the entire nation to one single, unyielding heartbeat. This desperate search for spatial and mechanical order marked the definitive end of the old world's innocence, as the natural rhythm of God was forcefully replaced by what social historians term railway time. The transition was not smooth, nor was it welcomed by those who still clung to the ancient authority of the sun. Across the country, traditionalists argued fiercely that to alter the local clocks to match an arbitrary office in London was an unnatural distortion of reality, an insult to the divine order of the universe. Yet, the relentless march of industrial objections, the vast networks of railway tracks required absolute, basic, unwavering synchronization to function safely and profitably. Step by step, station by station, the large authoritative faces of standardized station clocks began to appear in every town, forcing the local population to look up from their fields and confront a new, terrifying reality. It was a reality where a single minute could mean the difference between a successful journey or an absolute disaster, a world that was being rapidly, systematically enclosed within a mechanical framework from which there would be no escape. As we pause here on the very edge of this massive historical shift, let your mind rest in the complete and total safety of your own quiet space tonight. Remember that this content was developed with the assistance of advanced AI tools, verified and edited by the editorial team at Whispers of Centuries, Cispers Abshories, the all rights reserved. Until next time, Listen closely to the whispers of the past, because you never know what timeless wisdom might quietly find its way into your night. Breathe in deeply now, letting the ancient peace of the old world wash over you as you prepare for rest. As the iron veins of the railway network continued to spread across the geographical landscape of Britain, the old, comfortable isolation of the rural towns began to fracture under an immense administrative pressure. The local municipal authorities, once proud guardians of their own independent suntime, found themselves of the great transit cautions against the demands of the great transit corporations. In the early Motneen Tam Born Mere Gay, the directors of the Great Western Railway issued an absolute mandate, declaring that all station masters along their lines must synchronize their pocket watches every morning with the guard of the incoming London mail coach. Not this single act of corporate will effectively subjugate the solar reality of the provinces to the artificial timeline of the capital, creating a stark, binary divide between those who lived by the modern clock and those who still clung to the soil. For the common people, this new order introduced a profound psychological disorientation. An underlying before-sense existed in the history of human consciousness. The quiet, unhurried air of the village square was suddenly pierced by the arrival of a uniform mechanical standard, a heavy brass presence that looked down from the railway masonry like an omniscient eye. As you lie listening to this history unfold in the peaceful sanctuary of your dark room, you can take comfort in knowing that you are completely ancient anxiety. The passage of time tonight does not demand your productivity, and there are no trains you must catch, no bells you must answer. This channel, Whispers of Centuries, is always here to provide a quiet refuge from the rushing demands of the outer world. If this narrative is helping you find a sense of stillness tonight, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your small support helps ensure that this peaceful resting place remains open for everyone who seeks a quiet escape from the modern race. Let the soothing rhythm of these words carry you deeper into relaxation now, as we return to the changing streets of Motneen Tam Born Mere. The transition from local time to railway time was a profound cultural shock, forcing a population that had always thought in terms of broad, generous mornings to suddenly worry about the precision of a single minute. The abstract numbers on a clock face began to carry more weight than the actual position of the sun in the sky, marking the initial step in the systematic commercialization of human consciousness. The psychological shock of this new synchronization was most keenly felt at the intersections, where the old rural life collided with the frantic demands of the railway platforms. In the major transit hubs like Birmingham or Bristol, public clocks were temporarily outfitted with two distinct minute hands. One painted a deep, authoritative black to indicate the new London railway time, and another painted a pale, ghostly red to show the traditional local time of the town. For several years, these dual-faced instruments stood as a vivid visual testament to a society torn between two incompatible realities. Passers-by would stand in the street, staring up at the dials in quiet bewilderment, confronting the bizarre philosophical truth that it could simultaneously be two different times in the exact same physical space. The red hand represented the ancient, slow world of human biological comfort, a time that allowed for human error, fatigue, and the natural slowdown of winter. The black hand, however, represented the cold, mechanical future of industrial efficiency, a timeline that cared nothing for human physical limitations, weather conditions, or the natural rhythms of the human spirit. Gradually, under the immense economic pressure of the banking houses and shipping firms, the red hands of local time were systematically removed from the public clocks of Britain, symbolizing a quiet but unconditional surrender to the machine. This standardization did not just alter the schedules of trains, it fundamentally transformed the Eckengummelnot of the human mind, the loose, expansive consciousness of the pre-industrial worker, which thought in terms of wide morning stretches and task completion, was forcibly compressed into a narrow, linear track. Human beings began to develop an acute, unprecedented awareness, passage of individual minutes, that would eventually manifest as modern stress. To miss a train by a single turn of the gear was no longer a minor humorous inconvenience. It was a serious an entire chain of commerce that could disrupt. The natural world was being pushed into the background, and humanity was stepping into a new, artificial landscape, a world where the mechanical tick of a watch was becoming more real, more urgent, and more powerful than the very breath of the living earth. The transformation that began on the iron platforms of the railway stations quickly spilled over the stone walls of the cities, permanently altering the physical and mental landscape of the working population, due to the rapid progression of the Enclosure Acts, which systematically stripped the peasantry of their traditional rights to common lands. Tens of thousands of families were forced to abandon their ancestral villages. They migrated in massive, silent waves toward the industrial centres, leaving behind the open fields of Wiltshire and the quiet valleys of Devon to seek employment and iron foundries of Manchester, Leeds, and Sheffield. For these displaced people, the transition was not merely geographical. It was an existential shock that shattered their understanding of existence. They were uprooted from a world where time was measured by the gentle turning of the seasons and thrust into a dense urban environment dominated by the immense red brick fortresses of modern manufacturing. Here the sky was permanently choked by a thick, heavy canopy of black coal smoke that blotted out the sun, effectively erasing the ancient solar markers that had guided human labour for thousands of years. In this new industrial landscape, the natural biological cues of the human body were completely invalidated. The administrative requirements of the factory owners. It no longer mattered if a worker felt fatigued, or if the damp chill of a November morning made their joints ache. The organic rhythms of human biology were treated as a costly inefficiency that had to be thoroughly eradicated. The immense steam engines that powered the spinning mules and mechanical looms operated on a philosophy of perpetual motion, demanding a continuous, unyielding supply of human energy to keep the iron gears turning. The natural dawn was replaced by the hush that hissed inside the crowd of gaslights, hissed inside the crowd workshops, creating an environment where the distinction between day and night was systematically erased. Human beings were no longer viewed as independent craftsmen working at their own pace. They were reclassified as human components, mere extensions of the machinery that had to be synchronized with the absolute mathematical precisions of the steam valve. The mind was forced to adapt to a terrifyingly narrow perspective, a world where the wide, generous stretches of the old countryside mornings were replaced by a rigid, unyielding discipline that measured human worth by the second. Within these towering fortresses of brick and iron, the absolute enforcement of this new discipline required a central, visible authority, an instrument that could project the owner's will into every corner of the factory floor. This instrument was the pocket watch, a delicate yet powerful piece of technology that was rapidly transforming from a luxury ornament into a potent political weapon. If one were to walk down the narrow, rain-slicked avenues of Clerkenwell in London during this period, one would find an entire district dedicated to the meticulous crafting of these mechanical overseers. The air in these dark timber-framed workshops smelled faintly of whale oil, stale beer, and the sharp metallic tang of brass filings. Here, master horologists sat hunched over low wooden benches. Their eyes fitted Verkepte hat thick horn magnifying lenses as they assembled the intricate internal anatomy of the modern pocket watch. They worked by the pale light of tallow candles, using tiny steel files to shape the balance wheels and hairsprings that would soon dictate the lives of hundreds of people miles away. As you rest deeply within the quiet protection of your own space tonight, you can feel a profound sense of relief, knowing that the frenemies of production has completely stopped for you. The channel you are listening to, Whispers of Centuries, is a safe harbour where the relentless counting of minutes has no meaning, a place where you are permitted to simply exist, without output or expectation. If this gentle immersion into the realities of the past is helping you untangle your mind from the stress of the day, consider subscribing to the channel on this audio, or leaving a soft like. Your quiet engagement allows this space to remain a peaceful sanctuary for all who need to escape the pressure of the modern clock. Let your breathing remain slow and steady now, as we look closer at the world of nineteenth Tambonmui. The pocket watches produced in the workshops of London were far more than simple tools for telling time. They were the physical embodiment of an entirely new social philosophy. When a wealthy manufacturer purchased a finely crafted silver or gold pocket watch, he was not merely buying a piece of machinery. He was acquiring the structural authority to divide the day, to dictate the behavior of his workforce, and to establish an absolute monopoly over the collective actions of human beings. To understand how the pocket watch operated as an instrument of social control, one must look at the specific physical characteristics of these pieces during the industrial era. In the earlier part of the century, a pocket watch was predominantly a heavy, thick object, often referred to as a turnip watch due to its bulbous, rounded shape. These early timepieces were encased in thick layers of sterling silver or pinchbeck, a cheaper alloy of copper and zinc that mimicked the appearance of gold. However, by the year nineteenth, the design had evolved into something far more refined, slim, and precise. The elite of London society, the factory owners, and the landowning lords carried watches enclosed in heavy 18-carat gold cases, their surfaces polished to a mirror-like sheen that caught the amber glare of the gas lamps. When a gentleman or an overseer stood on the floor of a crowded workshop, the act of drawing his Verkepte hat from his waistcoat pocket was a highly ritualized demonstration of authority. The watch was attached to a thick, heavy chain made of solid gold links or braided hair, terminating in a small, ornate key that was used to wind the internal spring through a small hole in the back of the case. The face of the pocket watch was typically crafted from white vitreous enamel, a delicate substance made by fusing powdered glass to a metal disc at Motpe extreme temperatures. Against this brilliant, unblemished white background, the hours were painted in stark, black Roman numerals, bold and unyielding in their geometric structure. The minute hand, fine as a human hair and crafted from heat-blued steel, moved with a cold, terrifying regularity across the dial. Unlike the old church clocks that only possessed a single hand to indicate the general progression of the afternoon hand, these modern pocket watches featured an independent minute hand and increased a tiny, stuttering second hand that raced in a continuous circle at the bottom of the face. This tiny hand was the ultimate symbol of the new era. It did not merely show the hour. It divided the day into microscopic fragments, breaking the flow of human life into 60 rigid increments every single minute. When the overseer pressed a small spring near the winding stem, the front cover of the watch would appear, open with a sharp metallic click, a sound that, on the quiet floor of a factory or a boardroom, was immediately recognized as the voice of command. It was the sound of a human being, asserting his right to measure, judge, and consume the time of everyone around him. As you lie perfectly still in the darkness of your room tonight, you can contrast that rigid, mathematical coldness with the absolute freedom of your current rest. The minutes that pass now do not carry a financial penalty, and they are not being tracked by a supervisor standing over your bed. In this space, time is allowed to lose its sharp edges, becoming once again the wide, accommodating river that it was before the arrival of the machine. The internal mechanism of those 19th century watches was an incredibly dense labyrinth of tiny brass gears, mainsprings, and escape wheels, all working together to maintain a uniform rate of friction. Horologists called this assembly the movement, and it was engineered to be entirely indifferent to external circumstances. Whether it was raining heavily outside on the cobblestones, or whether the air inside the textile mill was thick with heat and cotton lint, the pocket watch continued its relentless, monotonous pace. This indifference was precisely what gave it such immense political utility. The owner of the watch could point to the unmoving white dial and use its mathematical certainty to any plea of exhaustion and any claim of natural variance. The watch became an infallible, objective standard, a mechanical god that sat in the vest pocket of the wealthy, quietly rewriting the rules of human behavior with every swing of its tiny internal balance wheel. When a manufacturer or an overseer pulled a gold-encased pocket watch from his waistcoat, he was utilizing a piece of machinery that had been engineered to remove all subjectivity from human existence. The physical sensation of holding one of these high-grade instruments was a constant reminder of class differentiation and economic supremacy. A genuine watch of London manufacture, such as those bearing the coveted stamp of the Vulliamy or Dent workshops, possessed a reassuring heavy density in the palm, its gold case meticulously engraved with intricate engine-turn patterns that provided a secure grip. To the working-class population who looked up from their workbenches, this polished, metallic disc was the visible face of a new political philosophy. The white enamel surface, free from any scratch or blemish, acted as an unyielding barrier against the messy, variable reality of human life. The black numbers painted upon its surface did not represent the shifting beauty of the cosmos. They represented a cold, mathematical division of life, where every single moment was viewed as a piece of property that could either be exploited for financial gain or lost to wasteful negligence. The true political power of the pocket watch lay in its ability to introduce the concept of abstract measurement into the daily interactions between the social classes. Before its widespread adoption by the industrial elite, disputes over labour were resolved by tangible results: the completion of a ditch, the stacking of a hayrick, or the delivery of a specific quantity of spun yarn. But with the pocket watch, the parameters of the conflict shifted entirely. The owner of the capital no longer purchased the product of a man's skill. He purchased the man's actual block of the day for a specific mathematically defined block of the day. The watch was the arbiter of this contract. When the overseer compared the positions of the blued steel hands to the arrival of a worker at the factory gate, he was applying an absolute standard that completely ignored the physical difficulties of human life in a 19th century city. It did not matter if the worker's crowded tenement apartment lacked a source of light to see by. or if the muddy, unpaved streets of the slums had become impassable due to a midnight downpour. The watch remained completely blind to these human variables, its internal escapement wheel continuing to tick with a sterile, mechanical indifference that transformed a normal human delay into a punishable breach of discipline. Let your own thoughts slow Deo Verkep know now, as you listen to the steady cadence of this history, knowing that you have completely escaped that rigid network of measurement. The dark room around you requires no accountability, and there is no watchful eye waiting to penalize your exhaustion. In this quiet space, you can let your body completely surrender its posture, allowing the heavy mattress to support you without any need to perform or produce. In the factories of Motin Tam Bo Min, the introduction of this pocket watch discipline caused a massive unspoken psychological shift among the laboring poor. For generations, human beings had experienced time as something internal and felt, a natural slowing down energy in the morning, a natural slowing down in the heat of the afternoon, and a desire for community around the evening fire. The watch effectively externalized this experience, tearing the concept of time away from the human body and placing it into a small metal box that belonged exclusively to the employer. The worker was forced to constantly look outward for permission to eat, permission to rest at Kabes, and permission to leave, gradually surrendering his own biological intuition to the absolute authority of the mechanisms that ticked in the overseer's pocket. As the discipline of the clock face solidified within the industrial, urban centers, it fundamentally altered the value of human existence, turning the passage of a day into a measurable financial ledger. In the grand architectural offices of the city directors and the smoke-filled boardrooms of the manufacturing elite, a new economic vocabulary was being written, one that used the precise divisions of the pocket watch to redefine the relationship between master and servant. It was during this period that the phrase spending time began to lose its metaphorical innocence and take on a literal, tariffied meaning. Time was no longer a common sky under which everyone walked. It was a highly volatile commodity, a form of raw capital that could be hoarded, traded, or stolen. The wealthy industrialist viewed an unproductive minute not as a moment of harmless rest, but as a direct financial loss, a leakage of potential wealth from his estate. Consequently, the pocket watch in his vest pocket was transformed from a passive recorder of the passing day into an active ledger made to an administrative lens through Verkep Hati Jerhat. Every human action on the shop floor was scrutinized for signs of temporal waste. This commercialization of moments resulted in a profound restructuring of the working-class domestic sphere as the rigid parameters of the factory gate began to dictate the most intimate routines of the home, the old habits of the traditional household, where meals were eaten when the food was ready, and stories were shared around a dying fire without a thought for the morning, were systematically dismantled by the absolute necessity of punctuality. Every member of a working class family, from the adult weaver from beneath the small frames, tasked with clearing cotton lint from beneath the spinning frames, had to learn to anticipate the cold movement of the overseer's pocket watch long before they ever set foot inside the mill. The home became a training ground for the clock, antechamber, where the natural, chaotic impulses of family life were forcefully smoothed away to ensure that no individual would arrive even 30 seconds late for their shift. The mind was subjected to an incessant, internal ticking, an invisible, psychological metronome that kept the body in a state of constant low-grade alertness, preventing the nervous system from ever fully collapsing into the deep, regenerative rest that the countryside had once provided so freely. Allow yourself to fully disconnect from that ancient sense of urgency now, as you settle deeper into the dark, quiet safety of your room tonight. The modern world, with all its clocks, notifications, and expectations, has drifted far into the background, leaving you completely untouched by its demands. In this soft, unhurried space, there are no ledgers to balance, no schedules to maintain, and no fines for simply letting your mind wander into the stillness of the dark. In the factories of nineteenth bon mi, the absolute authority of the onus watch was coda-hung upon the whitewashed walls of the rule books that were hung upon the whitewashed walls of the workshops. These lists of regulations explicitly stated that any worker who arrived after the iron gates were slammed shut at 6 o'clock in the morning would be docked a quarter of their daily wage, even if they were delayed by a matter of moments. The pocket watch was the final unappealable judge of these disputes. Its white enamel face and blue steel hands were treated as infallible text, an objective truth that rendered the human testimony of the worker completely irrelevant. Through this systematic application of mechanical law, the industrial elite successfully managed to cage the infinite rolling landscape of human experience within the narrow, unchanging boundaries of a mathematical grid. The psychological weight of this absolute mechanical standard created an atmosphere of profound vulnerability on the factory floor, or a tension that was amplified by the physical silence of the Wormsund. Workers in the presence of the overseer's watch, in the immense weaving sheds of Lancashire, where hundreds of power looms clattered in a deafening, rhythmic roar, the overseer would walk the elevated wooden catwalks, his fingers resting lightly upon the gold chain of his pocket timepiece. The workers below could not hear the quiet ticking of that small mechanism's overs, the thunderous poundings of the steam-driven iron frames, yet they were acutely aware of its silent, unyielding progression. They could see it in the way the supervisor would periodically stop, draw the gold disc from his pocket, and gaze down at the white enamel face with a cold, analytical intensity. Wetel incantu ho, that simple gesture, had the power to freeze the blood of a labourer. It was a visual reminder that their movements, their endurance, were sweated against an unmoving, mechanical absolute that knew nothing of human fatigue or hunger. This constant surveillance transformed the pocket watch into an invisible pane of glass that permanently separated the social classes, reinforcing the political hierarchy of the industrial age with every passing hour. The ownership of accurate time was an exclusive privilege of the wealthy. A high-quality watch capable of keeping time within a few seconds a week cost more than a common labourer could hope to earn in an entire year of unremitting toil. Thus, the elite held an absolute monopoly over the truth of the day. If an overseer asserted that a worker was 5 minutes late, the worker had no mechanical evidence to mount a defence, He could only offer his own subjective experience against the polished, certified accuracy of the master's gold watch. This disparity created a deep, simmering sense of injustice among the working poor, who felt that the hours were being artificially manipulated against them. The watch was not merely telling the time, it was actively manufacturing a new kind of human compliance, using the cold certainty of mathematics to silence the voice of human complaint and to validate the extraction of every last ounce of human energy. As you lie here now, completely removed from the heavy atmosphere of those 19th century workshops, you can let your body fully experience the luxury of absolute security. There is no supervisor monitoring your rest, no invisible clock measuring the efficiency of your sleep, and no penalty for letting your mind drift into the soft, unmapped spaces of the night. In the quiet darkness of your room, you are the absolute master of your own time. In the industrial cities of Montalban, this mechanical enclosure began to reshape the very architecture of the urban environment. The large town halls and corporate headquarters that began to dominate the skylines of Birmingham and Manchester were designed with massive, elevated clock towers that mimicked the form of the old church steeples but served an entirely different master. These civic clocks were synchronized directly with the pocket watches of the city directory owner, projecting the public streets, the markets, out into the the markets, and the homes of the citizenry. The entire city was being transformed into a single synchronized machine, a vast urban grid. The sun was systematically buried beneath the collective, unyielding tick of a million metallic gears. To ensure this ver-terre urban machine functioned without a single moment of friction, the industrial elite had to systematically eliminate any alternative methods of timekeeping that still lingered from the old world. In the dark, crowded alleyways of the industrial suburbs, away from the grand civic clock towers, many working-class families still attempted to rely on their own internal clocks, or the natural progression of the night sky, to prepare for the coming day. But as the penalties for tardiness grew more severe, the margin for error completely disappeared. A worker could not afford to guess the hour by the position of the North Star or the dampness of the morning air when a mistake of 3 minutes meant the loss of a day spread. This absolute desperation gave rise to a unique, highly specialized occupation within the industrial cities, the knocker-up. These individuals, often elderly men or women, who could no longer endure the brutal physical labor of the mills, were hired by entire neighborhoods of workers to act as human alarm clocks, bridging the gap between the private home and the absolute authority of the overseer's pocket watch. Long before the first pale streaks of dawn could penetrate the thick curtain of coal smoke that hung over the rooftops of Sheffield, the knocker-up would step out onto the damp, silent sand cobblestones, carrying a long, lightweight pole made of ash wood or bamboo, tipped with a cluster of stiff wire or small pebbles. They would move systematically from one dark cottage to the next. With practiced precision, they would reach up to the high soot-stained window panes of the upper bedrooms and tap a gentle, rhythmic pattern against the glass, a sound that was engineered to be family within, but quiet enough to avoid disturbing the neighbours who worked a different shift, where the knocker-up did not carry a golden pocket watch of their own. Instead, they began their rounds by walking to the nearest iron station house or factory gate, checking their pace against the massive, illuminated regulator clock that governed the district, and then walking the streets with a calculated, rhythmic stride that they had memorized over years of repetition. As you listen to the rhythmic tapping of history from the safety of your own warm bed tonight, you can feel a deep, settling peace wash over your limbs. The windows of your room are silent against the dark, and there are no long poles waiting to shatter your dreams, no early shifts calling you out into the cold, damp air of an industrial morning. Tonight, your time is completely your own, a wide and peaceful field where you can wander at your own leisure. In the mid-19th century, the appearance of the knocker-up was a poignant symbol of how thoroughly the pocket watch had managed to invade the private life of the individual. Even the act of waking up, the most intimate personal transition of the human day, had been stripped of its natural spontaneity and transformed into a highly disciplined, mechanical event. The human body was being systematically trained to ignore its own need for sleep, its own internal rhythms of rest and recovery, bending its spine instead to the unyielding mathematical absolute that ticked silently inside the polished waistcoat pocket of the master. The institutionalization of this mechanical awakening marked a profound victory for the factory owners, as the pocket watch successfully colonized the final sanctuary of human autonomy, somewhere the subconscious mind. By the mid-mortem Bournes, the elite did not merely use their timepieces to regulate the hours of attendance. They used them to fundamentally re-engineer the moral and philosophical definitions of human character. In the widely circulated pamphlets printed by corporate-funded civic societies in London, a new set of social virtues was aggressively promoted to the public. Concepts such as diligence, regularity, and temperance were explicitly tied to a person's ability to live in perfect alignment with the minute hand. Conversely, those who struggled to adapt to this rigid pacing, those who allowed their attention to wander, or who arrived at the gate even a few moments after the iron bolt had slid into place, were not merely criticized as inefficient workers. They were publicly condemned as morally corrupt, lazy, and socially dangerous individuals who threatened the stability of the entire empire. The pocket watch in the master's pocket thus became a visual emblem of moral superiority, a physical proof that its owner possessed the superior intellect and self-control required to govern both himself and the lower orders of society. When a wealthy magistrate or a coal baron took his seat at a local quarterly session, the heavy gold watch resting against his velvet vest was a silent witness to his administrative authority. He would consult its face before passing judgment on a vagrant or a displaced labourer, using the precise scientific measurement of the instrument to contrast his own disciplined existence with the chaotic, unstandardized lives of the poor. The watch had effectively shifted the baseline of human civilization. To be civilized was no longer a matter of wisdom, lineage, or community standing, but a matter of how perfectly an individual could surrender their natural human impulses to the mechanical rotation of a set of brass gears. As you allow the weight of this historical truth to settle peacefully into your awareness, tonight you can feel a deep sense of liberation, knowing that you are completely exempt from these judgment metrics. The darkness of your bedroom does not measure your value by your productivity, and the passing minutes are not an evaluation of your moral character. Here you are permitted to drop every mask, to release every standard of efficiency, and to simply exist in a state of absolute unpunished rest. In the expanding industrial towns, this moralization of time created a profound sense of psychological entrapment among the working classes. They realized that they were no longer just selling their physical labor. They were surrendering their internal cognitive freedom. The pocket watch had successfully transformed time into an invisible political cage, a framework that constantly monitored their movements, judged their worth, and systematically ushered away any remaining fragments of the slow, circular peace that had once belonged to everyone under the sun. This moralization of time introduced an entirely new structure of anxiety into the daily landscape of the urban working class, creating an invisible pressure that remained with them long after the factory fires had been sloughed down for the night. This, in the crowded tenement districts of Leeds and Manchester, where the houses were built back-to-back along narrow, unpaved courts, their absence of personal to constant created a climate of constant, unsettling speculation. Because a reliable pocket watch remained a financial impossibility for a family earning casual piece rates, workers were forced to develop a hyper-vigilant sensitivity to the ambient sounds of the city. They listened for the distant, deep resonance of the iron foundry bell, the specific pitch of a neighbour's window being tapped by a knocker-up, or the dull, collective rumble of iron-shod clogs echoing through the mist-shrouded streets at dawn. This reliance on external auditory markers kept the human nervous system in a state of perpetual low-grade tension, an absolute inability to fully disengage from the social machinery that lay waiting for them at the turn of the hour. The systemic control achieved by the Master S pocket watch was further consolidated through the implementation of highly complex, internal factory fines that turned the measurement of minutes into an active extraction of wealth. In many of the large cotton spinning firms, the official rulebook stated that if a worker was late by a mere 5 minutes, they would be penalized not just for those 5 minutes, but for an entire quarter of a day's labor. This systemic asymmetry meant that the employer was effectively using his certified mechanical standard to appropriate the uncompensated labor of his workforce, transforming an occasional human error into a highly profitable corporate asset. The pocket watch was the sole unappealable instrument used to execute these transactions. When the master or his chief clerk pulled the gold disc from his pocket to note an infraction, there was no independent regulatory board to verify the accuracy of the device. The watch was an absolute monarch, its blue steel hands writing an unalterable financial judgment against which disenfranchised worker had absolutely no legal recourse. Sink deeper into the soft, unmeasured stillness of your own bed tonight, letting the heavy comfort of this dark space erase any lingering remnants of modern urgency. In this room, there are no fines for stillness, no ledgers tracking the quality of your rest, and no authority checking your alignment with an arbitrary dial. You are completely permitted to let your thoughts dissolve into the soft, quiet shadows, letting your body rest in the ancient, unhurried security of the night. In the mid-19th century, this absolute temporal dominance began to spark the first organized waves of industrial resistance. Groups of radical working-class thinkers, writing under the influence of Chartist organizers, began to realize that the struggle for the control of time was fundamentally a struggle for the control of time. They launched clandestine campaigns, demanding the installation of large, publicly visible clocks on the exterior walls of the factories, clocks that could be seen by the entire community from the public street, thereby breaking the Master S's absolute, secretive monopoly over the white enamel face of the pocket watch and establishing a shared verifiable precedent for the length of a human day. Because the battle over the visibility of the clock face marked a pivotal moment in the cultural history of the 19th century, as the common people attempted to reclaim a small measure of control over their daily existence. For decades, the factory owners had guarded the faces of their high-grade pocket watches with a fierce, secretive jealousy, ensuring that the precise calculation of the hour remained an exclusive mystery of management. When the early trade unions and Chartist assemblies began to demand that public clocks be erected on the high brick facades of every major textile mill, they were not merely asking for a civic convenience. They were launching a direct political challenge against the absolute monopoly of temporal truth. They understood that as long as the Master S pocket watch remained the sole, invisible arbiter of the shift, the worker was trapped in an asymmetric reality where the duration of an hour could be lengthened or shortened at the whim of the person holding the gold chain. This demand for public clocks was met to heart immense resistance from the manufacturing elite, who recognized that a visible dial would invite unwanted scrutiny into their administrative practices. Many owners flatly refused to install external clocks, arguing that the public display of time would cause unnecessary distractions and encourage workers to watch the hands rather than focus on their machinery. In some notorious instances documented by early labour inspectors, factories that did install external clocks intentionally altered the mechanism, setting the street-facing dial 10 minutes slow in the morning to trap workers into late fines, while keeping the overseer's private pocket watch perfectly synchronized with the true railroad standard. This systemic manipulation of mechanical truth illustrated the terrified lengths to which the ruling class would go to maintain their grip on the behavior of the population. Werku Mietesdatch, proving that the watch had ceased to be a simple scientific tool and had instead become an instrument of class warfare wrapped in brass and gold. As you rest your head deeply upon the comforting softness of your pillow tonight, you can release a long, slow breath, knowing that you are completely removed from that deceptive machinery. The passing of your evening is not a contest of power, and there are no hidden dials or distorted schedules trying to steal your peace. In the absolute honesty of your dark room, you can let your body fully let go, allowing the quiet shadows to envelop you in a space that requires no performance and no vigilance. In the industrial towns of Motnin Tam Bon Mui, the struggle for a shared time standard eventually forced the British Parliament to intervene, leading to the early definitions of the Factory Acts. These legislative efforts sought to establish an official, legally binding framework for the working day, marking the first time the state had to step between the factory owner's pocket watch and the physical body of the citizen, a tacit admission that the unchecked power of the mechanical clock had become a threat to the biological survival of the working class itself. The introduction of the Factory Acts marked a complex, bittersweet milestone in the history of human society, as the state sought to place a legal ceiling on the extraction of human time. Yet even as Parliament passed regulations limiting the maximum length of a child's or a woman's working shift, the actual enforcement of these laws remained entirely dependent on the very tool that had created the option. The pocket watch. Government factory inspectors, tasked with travelling through the sprawling industrial districts of Yorkshire and Lancashire, were equipped with highly accurate, certified chronometers encased in protective leather sleeves. When an inspector walked unexpectedly through the iron gates of a mill, his first action was always to draw his watch and compare its reading to the master's private timepiece. This created an extraordinary silent duel of mechanisms, a confrontation where the state's official time sought to restrain the private, predatory time of the capitalist. Despite these legal interventions, the elite found ingenious ways to circumvent the spirit of the law while maintaining a flawless appearance of compliance. Because the early versions of the Factory Acts did not mandate a synchronized public clock in every town, factory owners frequently exploited the natural geographic variations in solar time that still lingered between the major urban centers. An employer might claim that his factory operated on local sun time when forcing the workers to arrive earlier, but would switch to the more advanced railway time, Mornhun rail when ringing the bell for the evening dismissal, thereby lengthening the shift by a few precious, uncompensated minutes. This practice, known among the bitter working-class communities as nibbling time, demonstrated that as long as the tool of measurement remained in the hands of the ruling class, the law was merely a paper barrier that could be subtly dissolved by the quiet adjustment of a gear or the slight turn of a winding key. As you lie here now, enveloped by the immense non-judgmental stillness of your own room, you can let your mind fully release the need to manage or track the passing moments. There are no inspector metrics here, no corporate strategies designed to nibble away at your peace and no deceptive schedules trying to extract your energy. In this dark sanctuary, time is completely pure, a wide and silent field where you can wander at your own pace until sleep naturally claims you. In the mid-19th century, this systemic manipulation of time began to alter the very physical biology of the urban population. Medical journals from the nineteenth began to record a new class of physical deformities among factory workers, curvatures of the spine, chronic exhaustion, and an unnatural, pale look caused by living entirely within an artificial mechanical calendar that not the pocket watch, which had begun its life as a beautiful testament to human ingenuity and the pursuit of scientific truth, had ultimately become a heavy, invisible yoke, had an unyielding metal weight that reshaped the bones, the posture, and the very spirit of the generation that lived beneath its terrified rule. By the late nineteenth, this systematic enclosure of human behaviour reached its final, absolute consolidation when the British legal and corporate systems formally merged to eliminate the last remaining pocket of temporal resistance. On a cold, misty morning in November Bombay, the Railway Clearing House, the central administrative body governing the nation's vast transit network, issued an historic directive that would permanently alter the rhythm of human life. They declared that from that day forward, Greenwich Mean Time, a uniform standard calculated at the Royal Observatory in London, would be adopted as the single absolute time for all railway operations across the entire island of Great Britain. Within a matter of months, this administrative decision rippled out from the Iron Hall, every parish church and every private business, effectively outlawing the ancient authority of the local sun. The natural variation of the Earth's rotation was officially erased by a corporate decree, was forced to bend its collective neck to a single, centralized mechanical pulse. Was so This total synchronization of the country completed the psychological transformation that the pocket watch had initiated decades earlier, with creating a society that was completely dependent on the precision of the machine, the loose, expansive consciousness of the old rural world, where a person's day was a generous canvas, painted completely replaced by a high vigigai, was completely replaced by a high vigilant, linear awareness dominated by the fear of falling behind. Human beings no longer looked up at the clouds to understand their relationship with the day. They looked down at the cold, white enamel dial of the watch. The pocket timepiece had successfully completed its historical journey, transforming from a delicate luxury item carried by the elite into the foundation, skeleton of the modern world, not a structural frame from which no individual, regardless of their social class, could ever fully escape again. As you lie here now, resting deeply within the absolute, quiet safety of your room tonight, you can feel a profound sense of relief, knowing that this long historical march has finally brought you to a place of total stillness. The frantic counting of minutes, the rigid discipline of the factory gate, and the unyielding demands of the synchronized city have completely faded into the dark, leaving you completely untouched by their pressure. In this soft, unhurried space, the channel you are listening to, Whispers of Centuries, has done its work to help you reclaim that ancient circular peace that once belonged to everyone under the sun. If this journey into the realities of the past has helped untangle your mind and prepare your body for rest, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your quiet engagement ensures that this peaceful sanctuary remains open for everyone who seeks an escape from the modern race. Let your breathing slow down completely now, in and out, letting the quiet shadows of the room wrap you in a deep, restorative embrace as you surrender to the timeless comfort of the night. The institutionalization of Greenwich Mean Time as the absolute law of the land did not merely establish an administrative baseline for industry, it permanently altered the interior architecture of human rest, reshaping the transition from waking consciousness into sleep. Before the complete synchronization of the British Isles, the arrival of nightfall was a fluid, communal invitation to slow down. Families did not consult a dial to determine if it was time to close their eyes. They watched the embers of the kitchen fire fade into grey ash, or listened to the shifting calls of the nocturnal birds in the orchard. Sleep was a natural yielding tide that rose and fell according to the physical exhaustion of the limbs and the deep stills of the surrounding landscape. It was a shared biological sanctuary that belonged entirely to the individual, an unmeasured domain where the mind could drift through its dreams without any external accountability or administrative oversight. But within the newly synchronized reality of the late Mortneen Tamborn Mi Gay, this final frontier of human autonomy was rapidly pulled into the mechanical matrix, because the factory whistles were now wired to the absolute precision of the railway chronometers, became a matter of strict mathematical calculation. Ori home, the worker, lying in a crowded tenement room within the shadow of a Manchester cotton mill, could no longer allow their body to wake up organically with the first pale touch of dawn. Welcome back. The modern clock demanded that the subconscious mind itself become an internal mechanism that remained constantly on guard against the threat of a late arrival. The Fundrika, even in the deepest hours of the night, when the silence of the city was broken only by the distant, heavy thud of the steam piston, the human nervous system remained taut, tethered to the unyielding progression of the hands that ticked inside the masteress' waistcoat pocket miles away. As you allow yourself to sink into the heavy, supportive comfort of your own bed tonight, you can consciously choose to sever that ancient, artificial tether. The room around you is entirely free from the demands of synchronization, and there are no factory bells waiting to disrupt your dreams, no absolute metrics judging the efficiency of your rest. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we believe that the night should be exactly what it was, before the arrival of the machine, a wide, dark ocean of complete and unpunished stillness where you are permitted to let go of every burden. If this gentle immersion into the struggles of the past is helping you untangle the stress of your day, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a soft like on this audio. Your quiet presence helps keep this peaceful sanctuary open for every weary mind seeking an escape from the modern clock. Let your thoughts drift away now, like dry leaves floating down a dark, slow-moving river. The physical consequences of this total temporal enclosure were felt most acutely by the generations born into the heart of the industrial era. Medical inspectors, travelling through the manufacturing districts, began to document an unprecedented epidemic of chronic insomnia, nervous exhaustion, and what they termed industrial melancholy among the working class population. Human beings were showing signs of systemic structural fatigue, their bodies and minds breaking down under the relentless pressure of a lifestyle that refused to allow for natural variance or seasonal rest. The pocket watch, which had once been celebrated as the highestific refinement, had ultimately succeeded in transforming time into a heavy, inescapable cage. Inescapable cage. It was a cage made of polished brass, white enamel, and heat-blued steel, an administrative framework that had successfully uprooted humanity from the slow circular peace of the ancient earth and cast it into a linear, unyielding race that would continue to turn the wheels of the modern world for centuries to come. As the final years of the nineteenth bled into the dawn of a new decade, the systematic dominance of the mechanical clock began to generate a secondary, highly profitable industry within the expanding urban centres. The wealthy manufacturing class, having successfully established their absolute monopoly over the truth of the working day, realized that the discipline of the pocket watch could be extended even further into the very sensory habits of the domestic sphere. It was during this specific historical window that the early mechanical alarm clocks, or peep-o-day clocks, as they were known in the trade workshops of Birmingham, began to be mass-produced the commercial market. These instruments were a far cry from the elegant, silent masterpieces carried by the elite. They were crude, loud devices encased in cheap stamped iron or sheet brass, engineered with a single, aggressive purpose: to shatter the natural sleep cycle of the household with a violent metallic clang that mimicked the summoning bell of the factory gate. This commercial expansion marked a critical psychological shift in the history of human behaviour. For the first time, the instrument of temporal discipline was not merely an external threat, carried in the vest pocket of an overseer or projected from a civic tower. It had actively crossed the threshold of the home, taking up a permanent station upon the wooden mantelpiece of the working-class bedroom. The family no longer required a knocker up to strike their window panes with an ash pole, nor did they need to listen for the distant resonance of the municipal foundry. The machine had been invited into the ultimate sanctuary of privacy, where its harsh rhythmic ticking served as an incessant, internal reminder of the economic penalties that awaited anyone who failed to maintain alignment with the global market. The home was no longer a refuge from the factory. It had been successfully converted into an administrative satellite, but a domestic training ground where the human nervous system was systematically supremacy of the mechanical hour, from the very moment of awakening. Let your own breathing drop into a deep, unhurried rhythm now as you listen to the steady cadence of this history, knowing that you have completely excluded those aggressive mechanisms from your personal space tonight. The darkness that wraps around your bed does not contain a single alarm waiting to disrupt your peace, and there are no financial ledger metrics tracking the depth of your rest. In this soft, quiet room, your time is completely restored to its original natural state, a wide open meadow where your mind can wander without any boundaries, expectations, or demands. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we strive to build a calm harbour can be frantic pace dismantled, allowing your body to remember the ancient, allowing your body or restorative stillness that existed before the world was forced to live by the second. If this narrative is helping you find a sense of absolute security tonight, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your small support helps ensure that this quiet oasis remains open for everyone who needs to escape the pressure of the synchronized world. By the time the great exhibition of Motin Tam Numwi Mort opened its massive glass doors in London's Hyde Park, the transformation of human consciousness was complete. Among the thousands of glittering technological wonders displayed beneath the crystal arches, the horological pavilion stood as a monument to a global victory. There, rows of perfectly synchronized marine chronometers, intricate astronomical regulators, and mass-produced pocket watches ticked in a flawless, terrifying unison that was celebrated by the political elite as the ultimate triumph of human intellect over the chaos of nature, the wild variable rhythms of the ancient seasons, the lazy mornings of the English countryside, and the deep, restorative winters that had guided human existence for millennia were officially treated as primitive historical artifacts. Humanity had stepped irrevocably into the modern era, an era where the living body was no longer the master of its own experience, but a moving gear within a vast synchronized empire of metal and glass that would never sleep again. The display of synchronized perfection at the Great Exhibition of Morthanmarsham Nummi Mort solidified a new social truth. The mechanical clock had successfully severed humanity's connection to the natural world. This separation was not diuete, felt in the roaring factory districts. It began to creep urban tenements. I crept silently into the quietest, most isolated corners of the rural landscape, in the small agricultural villages of Dorset and Somerset, where life had been governed of corn and the natural behaviour of livestock. The arrival of the standardized railway timetables created a strange, bifurcated existence. The older generation of labourers, whose hands were calloused from decades of swinging the scythe, found themselves entirely unable to comprehend why a modern clock hand should dictate when they must begin their harvest. They looked up at the midday sun, heavy and golden in the summer sky, and then down at the station that were completely the laws of industrial capital, that, according to the laws of industrial capital, the sun was now telling the wrong time. This cultural alienation marked the true, quiet tragedy of the industrial transition, the systematic erasure of a shared cosmic vocabulary. Not for thousands of years, human beings had shared an understanding of existence that was rooted in the visible landscape. To speak of an event occurring at the gathering of the cattle or the folding of the sheep was to invoke a physical, tangible reality that every member of the community could see, feel, and understand. This language did not demand a high-grade mathematical instrument to interpret. It required only that a person be alive, alert, and deeply connected to the living earth beneath their feet. But as the pocket watch became the universal arbiter of human interaction, this rich sensory framework was completely dismantled. The organic, textured language of the seasons was forcefully replaced by the cold, monosyllabic repetition of the tick, a sterile linguistic grid that stripped the day of its unique character and reduced the infinite, shifting beauty of commercialized numbers into a series. Instead, as you lie listening to this history unfold from the absolute, unmonitored safety of your own quiet space tonight, you can feel a deep sense of validation for your own exhaustion, the pressure to constantly track the minutes, to maximize your daily output, and to live in perfect alignment with an artificial schedule is not a natural human condition. It is a heavy, historical construct that was systematically imposed upon our ancestors only a few generations ago. Tonight you have permission to completely resign from that exhausting race. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we seek to provide a gentle sanctuary where that ancient, unhurried perspective can be safely reclaimed, allowing your nervous system to fully disengage from the constant vigilance of the modern day. If this immersive journey into the realities of the past is helping you find a true sense of comfort and release, please leaving a soft subscribing to the channel or leaving a soft like on this audio. Your quiet engagement allows this restful oasis to remain open for all who seek an escape from the relentless machine. By the middle of the Mortneen Tam Nummi Gay, this mechanical enclosure had achieved what social philosophers call the total colonization of everyday life. The pocket watch was no longer just a tool for managing work. It had become the primary lens through which human beings evaluated their own personal worth. To be late for a social engagement, to allow a field to lie fallow for an extra afternoon, or to simply sit upon a wooden stile and watch the clouds float past without a specific, Productive purpose was now viewed as a form of social degeneracy. The mind had been thoroughly trained to police itself, harbouring a constant low-grade alarm that whispered of lost time and wasted opportunities even during the hours of darkness. The ancestral peace that had once allowed the human spirit to float effortlessly within a generous, unbounded sea of moments had been completely drained away, leaving in its place a highly disciplined, anxious society that was trapped forever within the narrow, unyielding track of a mechanical future. The psychological internalization of this mechanical cage meant that by the late nineteenth had begun to lose the very silence. The industrial capacity for deep, unburdened andals in the expanding suburbs of London, where the newly enriched merchant class built their heavy stone villas, a new architectural feature began to appear in the design of classicals. Domestic interior, the dedicated clock hall. These grand entryways were dominated by massive, dark mahogany long-case clocks, whose heavy lead weights and brass pendulum discs swung with a slow, resonant thud that echoed through the empty corridors like an unyielding heartbeat. This sound was not intended to soothe. It was designed to project discipline into the domestic sphere of strict, within the privacy of the domestic sphere, ensuring that even within the privacy of the family parlour, the guests, the children, and the domestics reminded that the hours of life were being systematically counted, weighed, and spent. This domestic installation of the machine marked the final, unconditional surrender of the human sensory landscape to the philosophies of the market, the natural background sounds of the old world, the distant rush of a hillside stream, the gentle creaking of timber beams in the wind, or the soft breathing of livestock in the barn, were completely overwhelmed by the monotonous, metallic cadence of the pendulum. This sound became the default soundtrack of the 19th century home, a constant psychological metronome that conditioned the human mind in terms of linear progression. Every single tick was a visual and auditory reminder that a fragment of life had been permanently consumed, inducing a chronic, underlying state of existential anxiety that prevented the nervous system from ever fully entering a state of complete, unvigilant relaxation. Humanity had successfully constructed an artificial environment where the concept of a timeless moment was treated as an absolute impossibility. As you rest your body deeply within the soft protected sanctuary of your dark room tonight, you can feel a profound sense of liberation, knowing that you have completely banished that relentless cadence from your presence. The space around your bed is entirely silent, a deep and welcoming pool of stillness. Does not carry a psychological threat or a financial ledger entry, not to financial ledger entry. In this unmonitored sanctuary, you are permitted to let your mind float completely free from allowing your consciousness to dissolve into wasem borispes, not the wide, circular peace that existed before the arrival of the iron gears. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we are dedicated to preserving this quiet harbour, creating an oasis where the heavy weights of modern performance can be safely dropped at the edge of the mattress. If this gentle immersion into the changing realities of our ancestors is helping you untangle your thoughts and prepare your limbs for rest, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a soft like on this audio. Your small support ensures that this peaceful resting place remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized world. The ultimate manifestation of this temporal anxiety was recorded in the changing patterns of human community life. By the turn of the modern Tam Saumi Gay, the traditional country wakes, the multi-day seasonal fairs, and the spontaneous community festivals that had once defined the rural calendar were systematically suppressed by municipal authorities across Britain. These ancient celebrations were explicitly targeted because they represented an unacceptable flow of industrial capital to the uniform fuel capital. A town that abandoned its factories for 3 days to celebrate a traditional harvest feast was viewed as a dangerous pocket of resistance against the global economy. The pocket watch had successfully rewritten the definition of community, transforming a society of independent, tightly knit craftsmen into a loose collection of atomized, synchronized individuals who no longer look to one another for solidarity, but instead look down at the white enamel faces in their palms to verify their alignment with the collective march of the machine. The systematic suppression of the ancient community festivals marked the final victory of the mechanical clock over the traditional structures of human solidarity, leaving the working population entirely isolated within their synchronized routines. By the early nineteenth the vibrant chaotic spaces where people once gathered to share stories, trade songs, and celebrate the natural turning of the earth had been thoroughly cleansed by administrative decrees. In their place, the municipal authorities established highly regulated civic spaces designed to reinforce the virtues of punctuality and individual isolation. If a group of displaced labourers attempted to gather on a public common to play a traditional game or share a cask of ale without a licence, they were immediately dispersed by the newly professionalised police forces, who carried official police-issue pocket chronometers to document the exact minute of the infraction. The community was being systematically dismantled, broken down into a collection of atomized individual sky, who no longer shared only a common schedule, but instead shared only a common schedule. This profound social isolation transformed the pocket watch from a simple economic tool into a deeply personal psychological crutch, a mechanical companion that filled the empty spaces left by the destruction of community life. A clerk or a skilled artisan walking home through the damp, gaslit streets of London after a 12-hour shift would frequently draw his silver watch from his pocket, simply to listen to its rhythmic ticking in the darkness. This sound, which had begun its historical journey as an instrument of class oppression on the factory catwalk, was now embraced as a source of twisted comfort, a familiar, predictable heartbeat in a world that had become increasingly cold, mechanical, and unpredictable. The watch had successfully completed its colonization of the human spirit. It was no longer viewed as an external enemy to be resisted with Chartist petitions, but as an indispensable part of the self, an internal identity marker that separated the respectable, disciplined citizen from the chaotic outcasts who still attempted to live by the natural light of the sun. As you allow the heavy weight of this historical evolution to settle peacefully into your awareness tonight, you can take a deep restorative breath, knowing that you have completely stepped outside that artificial landscape. The dark, quiet room around you does not require you to be a respectable citizen, and it does not judge your character by your alignment with a mechanical dial. Here, away from the watchful eyes of the synchronized world, you are permitted to reclaim the ancient solidarity of complete, unmonitored rest. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we strive to build a calm harbour where the fragments of your day can be gently gathered and laid to rest, allowing your body to remember the deep, natural stillness that existed before humanity was forced to live by the tick of a gear. If this immersive journey into the struggles of our ancestors is helping you untangle your mind and find a sense of true security tonight, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a soft like on this audio. Your quiet presence helps ensure that this peaceful sanctuary remains open for everyone who needs to escape the pressure of the machine. By the time the final decades of the 19th century approached, the absolute rule of the pocket watch had become so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life that its historical origins were completely forgotten. Children born in the industrial cities grew up believing that the 60-second minute and the 12-hour shift were unchangeable facts of nature, as inherent to the universe as the stars or the rain. The memory of a time when human beings worked at their own pace, rested when their limbs were heavy, and gathered to celebrate the changing of the seasons, without a thought for the morning, had been entirely erased from the collective consciousness. The pocket watch had successfully rewritten human history, establishing a permanent, unyielding empire of mathematics and glass that would continue to dictate the behaviour, the posture, and the very thoughts of humanity into the modern age, forever caging the infinite landscape of existence within the narrow track of a synchronized future. The complete erasure of this ancient temporal memory paved the way for the pocket watch to conquer the last remaining domain of human independence, the global marketplace of agricultural commerce. By the mid-Motan-Somnese, the illusion that the countryside could maintain its traditional, slow-moving lifestyle was shattered as the major grain exchanges and livestock markets of London and Chicago became fully linked by the electric telegraph. Suddenly, a farmer working the fertile fields of Lincolnshire was no longer competing merely vekeptehat his neighbours in the next parish. His daily efficiency was being measured directly against the production speeds of automated agricultural combines thousands of miles away. Combines to survive in this terrifying new network of global commerce. The traditional country gentleman had to cast aside his grandfather's comfortable, orthodox seasonal habits and equip his field overseers with high-grade steel chronometers, bringing the unyielding discipline of the urban Texan directly into the open air of the English wheat fields. This agricultural synchronization transformed the very physical appearance of the rural landscape to the absolute parameters of the clock face. The old, winding field boundaries that had been shaped by generations of human footsteps and the natural movements of cattle were systematically straightened and flattened to facilitate the unhindered movement of steam-driven ploughs. These massive iron machines burning tons of coal and throwing thick plumes of black smoke into the clean country air operated on the same philosophy of perpetual motion that governed the urban factories. The workday was no longer defined by the physical endurance of the horses or the natural dampness of the morning dew. The steam ploughs demanded a continuous, mechanical pace that kept the labourers straining under the hot sun, long after their ancestors would have retired to the shade of the hedgerows for rest and community conversation. As you allow your limbs to grow heavy and comfortable in the complete stillness of your room tonight, you can feel a deep sense of relief, knowing that the exhausting demands of modern efficiency have completely stopped at the edge of your mattress. The dark space around you does not require any output, and there are no global markets or electronic notifications waiting to judge your productivity or measure your value. In this soft, unhurried sanctuary, the channel you are listening to provides of centuries a safe harbour, where you can safely let go of every burden, allowing your mind to sink into the deep, circular peace that once belonged to everyone before the arrival of the iron gears. If this immersive journey into the struggles of the past is helping you untangle your thoughts and prepare your body for rest, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your quiet engagement allows this restful oasis to remain open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized race. By the time the autumn harvest arrived, in the late 19th Salmier, the psychological victory of the machine was total. The traditional harvest song, which had been sung for centuries to pace the movements of the reapers and to celebrate the shared bounty of the earth, had completely died out. Replaced by the mechanical clatter of the reaping machine and the sharp, anxious commands of the supervisor checking his pocket watch. The worker had been thoroughly trained to view every passing cloud, not as a beautiful manifestation of mechanical schedule, but as a potential threat to the mechanical schedule, a source of financial waste that had to be overcome through sheer physical desperation. The pocket watch had successfully completed its mission, transforming the wide, generous rhythms of the rural landscape into a narrow, linear track of survival, an unyielding framework that stripped the natural world of its sacred character and locked humanity within a permanent synchronized struggle against the unstoppable movement of the hands. The complete synchronization of agricultural commerce effectively finalized the infrastructure of the global empire, transforming the passage of human time into a standardized, worldwide currency. By the late 19th Salmier, this mechanical discipline began to expand far beyond the borders of Western Europe, riding the iron tracks of the steam locomotives and the deep-sea cables of the electric telegraph into the heart of distant continents. In the colonial trading ports of India, the bustling harbours of Hong Kong, and the expanding industrial zones of Southeast Asia, traditional societies were suddenly forced to confront a terrifying new reality. They were uprooted from their ancient, circular calendars that had been deeply rooted in the rhythmic monsoons, the sacred cycles of the moon, and the community rituals of the harvest, and thrust into a cold linear world governed entirely by the certified precision of the British pocket watch. This global expansion created an unprecedented international hierarchy of punctuality, where the economic value of an entire nation was judged by how perfectly its population could align their daily habits with the time standard of London. In the grand corporate headquarters of the colonial trading monopolies, directors sat at long teak wood tables, their fingers resting upon high-grade marine chronometers as they drafted strict regulations for their overseas warehouses and transport docks. With the local workers, who had spent generations navigating the day by the changing heat of the sun and the natural calls of the coastal birds, were now subjected to severe financial penalties if their cargo was not loaded at the exact minute specified by the telegraphic schedule. The pocket watch had ceased to be a mere European convenience. It had become an invisible, global net that was cast across the entire planet, dragging the diverse cultures of the earth into a single, unyielding rhythm of production. As you rest your body deeply within the quiet protection of your own dark room tonight, you can feel a profound sense of gratitude, knowing that the vast network of global synchronization has completely faded into the background for you. The modern world, with all its deadlines and constant time zones, cannot reach you in this soft sanctuary. The channel you are listening to, Whispers of Centuries, is a safe harbour where you are permitted to completely step off the linear track of efficiency, allowing your mind to reclaim the wide, comforting stillness that existed before the world was forced to live by the tick of a brass gear. If this gentle immersion into the hidden realities of our ancestors is helping you untangle your mind from the stress of the day, consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a soft like on this audio, your quiet engagement for all who need to escape the pressure of the clock. By the turn of the nineteenth century, this global temporal enclosure began to permanently alter the very psychology of human relationships. In the expanding urban centres, in the traditional habits of hospitality, where a traveller was welcomed into a home for an indefinite stay, and stories were shared around a table without a thought for the morning, were systematically dismantled by the rigid requirements of the synchronized schedule. Human interactions were increasingly broken down into discrete, mathematically managed appointments, each one carefully measured against the face of the pocket watch to ensure that no time was wasted on unproductive conversation. The mind was forced to adopt a calculating, guarded perspective, viewing every encounter not as an opportunity for genuine human connection, but as a potential expenditure of precious temporal capital that had to be strictly budgeted to ensure individual survival within the modern machine. As the decade of the nineteenth century advanced, the total synchronization of human activity, the restructured, the unstructured innocence of victim, the unstructured. In the earlier decades of the century, before the absolute consolidation of the clock face, children living in rural or semi-urban communities still occupied a world that was largely immune to the frantic counting of minutes. Their days were measured by the physical sensations of play, the gradual lengthening of tree shadows across the grass, or the simple promptings of hunger. They possessed an innate, expansive relationship with the passing day, experiencing time not as a rigid line rushing toward a deadline, but as a deep, circular pool where they could lose themselves entirely in the microscopic exploration of a hedgerow or the slow construction of a wooden toy. However, as the regulatory framework of the pocket watch hardened around the family structure, the state and the manufacturing class realized that to maintain the efficiency of the empire, the next generation had to be conditioned to accept mechanical discipline long before they ever stepped onto the factory floor. This philosophy gave rise to the massive expansion of the modern board school system, where the architecture of education was explicitly designed to mirror the layout of the industrial mill. When a young child crossed the threshold of these new civic institutions, they were not merely entering a space of learning. They were entering a highly high-disciplined synchronization chamber. The entire school day was broken down into rigid 30-minute blocks, each one initiated and terminated by the aggressive metallic resonance of a central brass bell that was synchronized directly with the headmaster's pocket chronometer. Let your own breathing settle into a slow, natural cadence now, as you listen to the steady progression of this history, knowing that you have completely escaped that rigid network of measurement tonight. The dark room around you does not contain any bells waiting to shatter your thoughts, and there are no institutional schedules demanding your attention or evaluating your progress. In this quiet sanctuary, your mind is permitted to return to that ancient childlike state of unmeasured existence, a wide and peaceful field where you can wander through the shadows without any obligation to perform. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we strive to build a safe harbour where the exhausting structures of the modern day, allowing your body to sink into the deep, allowing your body deemed to the deep restorative stillness that belongs to you by right of nature. If this immersive journey is helping you untangle your mind and prepare your limbs for rest, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a sock on this audio. Your quiet engagement ensures that this peaceful oasis remains open for all who seek an escape from the machine. By the late nineteenth century, this educational conditioning had successfully reshaped the very nature of human play. Traditional, unstandardized children-esque games, games that had been passed down through oral tradition for centuries and had no fixed duration or formal rules, were systematically discouraged by educators in favor of highly organized, time-limited sports. These new athletic pursuits were designed with a specific pedagogical purpose to teach the young mind to operate as a precise cooperative unit within a fixed temporal framework. A game was no longer allowed to end naturally when the participants grew tired or the light faded from the sky. It was brought to an absolute, mathematical conclusion by the sharp blast of a metal whistle, an auditory command that was synchronized to the second with the pocket watch held in the palm of the instructor. Nor Kargin the Gordly, but the victory was absolute. The modern world had succeeded in caging the fluid, creative energy of human youth within the narrow, unyielding track of a mechanical future, ensuring that the workers of tomorrow would never remember what it felt like to be true free under the sun. The transformation of youth into a highly disciplined army of timekeepers laid the groundwork for the ultimate expansion of mechanical authority during the late Motten by Mijia. May the Bun Mean by Zgalipu, the systematic regulation of the human digestive system. Before the absolute dominance of the pocket watch, human hunger was experienced as an internal, biological dialogue between the body and the stomach. People ate when their physical energy began to wane, or when the natural tasks of the morning, the digging of a ditch, the milking of the cows, or the spinning of a wool skein, reached a logical point of completion. Meals were fluid, social events that expanded or contracted, according to the availability of food and the depth of the conversation around the table. None the tools, the stomach operated as its own sovereign clock, an organic dial that maintained a deep intuitive rhythm with the caloric needs of the individual. But as the factory gate and the school bell hardened the boundaries of the daily schedule, this internal biological intuition was forcefully overridden by the absolute precision of the Master S pocket watch. The industrial elite realized that to maximize the output of their machinery, the act of human nutrition had to be a single, mathematically uniform window across the entire workforce. Suddenly, thousands of men, women, and children were forbidden from responding to their own internal signals of exhaustion. They were forced to wait until the minute hand of the overseer's gold watch reached the exactical marker of midday, at which point a loud steam horn would release them for a rigid 30-minute interval. If a labourer attempted to eat a piece of bread 5 minutes before the horn, or if they lingered over their tea 30 seconds after the gears began to turn again, they were subjected to immediate financial fines that threatened the survival of their entire family. As you lie perfectly still in the deep, unmonitored safety of your room tonight, you can feel a profound sense of comfort knowing that your body is completely free to dictate its own rhythms. The darkness around your bed does not impose an artificial schedule upon your physical needs, and there are no factory horns waiting to restrict your comfort or penalize your fatigue. Welcome back, Hind. In this soft sanctuary, the channel you are listening to, Whispers of Centuries, provides an unhurried space where you can allow your nervous system to fully disengage from the constant vigilance of the modern day. If this journey into the hidden realities of the past is helping you untangle your mind and find a true sense of comfort, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your quiet presence ensures that this peaceful resting place remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized race. By the turn of the Motin Tam Tam Muigiyi, this mechanical enclosure of digestion had permanently altered the physical health of the urban population. So while medical practitioners in the major manufacturing hubs began to record an unprecedented rise in chronic digestive disorders, stomach ulcers, and metabolic illnesses that had been virtually unknown in the old rural world. The human body was exhibiting a systemic rebellion against the rigid parameters of the clock, its internal organs struggling to function within an artificial framework that refused to allow for natural variance or metabolic individuality. Called the pocket watch had successfully colonized the deepest chemical processes of human life, transforming the simple sacred act of sharing a meal into a highly pressured mechanical transaction, a transaction that stripped the body of its native intelligence and locked it within a permanent synchronized struggle against the unyielding rotation of last gears of a set of brass gears. The systemic enclosure of biological functions during the early nineteenth effectively finalized the transformation of the human body into an industrial asset, before leading directly to the ultimate stage of temporal colonization. The standardization of human sleep architecture, before the absolute consolidation of Greenwich Mean Time and the mass adoption of the pocket watch, the concept of a night's rest was deeply stratified and inherently flexible. Historians and medical diaries from the pre-industrial era frequently note that human beings naturally experience what was known as segmented sleep, a pattern where an individual would drift off. Bakuji, with the fading of the light, wake naturally after a few hours of deep rest to read, pray, or converse by the hearth, and then return to a second sleep until the morning bird calls. This fluid, two-part rhythm was a natural reflection of human biology, a protective mechanism that allowed the nervous system to process the experiences of the day without the pressure of a continuous, unbroken block of forced unconsciousness. However, as the pocket watch in the overseer vest pocket became the absolute dictator of the morning gate, this ancient, fragmented rest pattern became an economic impossibility for the working-class family. The modern industrial system required that a worker be completely present, alert, and active for a continuous 12 to 14-hour stretch of physical labor. Consequently, the state and the medical establishment began to wage a quiet psychological campaign against the traditional habits of the night. Segmented sleep was publicly condemned in health manuals as a sign of laziness, inefficiency, and mental instability. The population was forcefully instructed to compress their entire nocturnal existence into a single, highly disciplined block of rest, explicitly designed to terminate at the precise second the morning knocker-up arrived at the window pane. The night itself had been flattened, its natural shadows and variable rhythms systematically ironed out to ensure the mechanical gears at the turn of the hour. As you allow the full weight of this historical evolution to wash over you from the absolute unmonitored safety of your own bed tonight, you can release a long, deep breath of total liberation. The room around you does not recognize the industrial compression of the night, and there are no schedules waiting to penalize your restlessness or evaluate the architecture of your dream. In this dark sanctuary, your sleep is entirely your own, a fluid, boundless ocean where you can wake, drift, or rest exactly as your body dictates, completely free from the demands of the modern machine. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we are dedicated unhurried to restoring that ancient and unhurried autonomy to your evening routine, creating a safe harbor where the heavy armor of productivity can be safely cast aside. If this immersive journey into the struggles of our ancestors has helped untangle your thoughts and prepare your limbs for rest, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your quiet support ensures that this peaceful resting place remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized race. By the mid-Motin Tam Miss, this total temporal enclosure had achieved what can only be described as the mechanization of the human soul. The pocket watch had successfully transitioned from an external tool of convenience into an internal, psychological sovereign. A person born into this hardened industrial landscape could no longer imagine an alternative reality. They carried the clock within their very blood, policing their own thoughts, budgeting their own emotions, and evaluating their entire existence by the cold, mathematical precision of the dial, the infinite circular piece that had once connected humanity to the rolling seasons, the shifting tides, and the slow, majestic dance of the cosmos had been entirely buried beneath a mountain of gears. Humanity had completed its ultimate monument to progress. A world where everyone was perfectly synchronized, perfectly punctual, and profoundly tired, locked forever within the narrow, unyielding track of a mechanical future that would never allow them to look up at the sun again. As the decade of the Motnin Tam Taimige drew to a close, the internal sovereign of the clock face expanded its reach beyond the factories and homes, permanently altering the natural geography of human movement and recreation. Before the absolute dominance of the pocket watch, the act of travelling from one place to another was an elastic, deeply sensory experience. A person walking or riding a horse between villages measured their progress by the gradual exhaustion of their mount, the changing texture of the road underfoot, or the specific position of the sun as it filtered through the oak canopies. If a sudden rainstorm turned the clay roads into thick mud, or if a traveller encountered an old friend at a roadside inn, the journey simply expanded to accommodate the event. Time was a servant to human experience, bending and stretching to fit the organic realities of the physical world. But with the total consolidation of the national railway grid under a single synchronized master clock, this completely systematically destroyed. The railway companies, operating with a fierce financial jealousy over every wasted minute, introduced highly complex, printed timetables that turned the geography of the country into a rigid grid of mathematical intervals. A train was no longer a vessel waiting for its passengers. It was a mechanical missile at the exact second specified by the company director S. Pocket chronometer. If a commuter was delayed by a single minute, even if they had walked for miles through a driving winter gale, the iron gates were slammed in their face without a shred of human sympathy. The pocket watch had successfully turned the act of travel into a high-stakes psychological contest, a frantic race against a pair of blue Stevens that knew nothing of human effort, weather conditions, or physical fatigue. Sink deeper into the soft, unmonitored stillness of your own room tonight, letting the heavy comfort of this dark space erase any lingering remnants of modern urgency. In this room, there are no departures to catch, no timetables tracking your progress, and no penalty for letting your mind drift far away from the rigid lines of the modern map. Here, you are completely permitted to wander through the quiet shadows at your own leisure, allowing your body to rest in the ancient, unhurried security of the night. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we aim to provide a gentle sanctuary where the frantic pacing of the modern world can be completely dissolved, helping you complete the wide, peaceful horizon that once belonged to everyone before the arrival of the machine. If this immersive journey into the realities of the past is helping you untangle your thoughts and find a sense of true comfort, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your small support ensures that this quiet oasis remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized race. This total mechanization of travel gave rise to a new cultural phenomenon among the urban middle classes, The highly compressed, time-budgeted weekend holiday. For the first time in history, the rare days of rest allowed to the population were subjected to the same rigorous accounting principles that governed the factory floor. Excursion trains, specifically engineered to maximize passenger density and corporate profit, carried thousands of tired workers from the smoke-choked centres of Birmingham and Brighton for a strict 48-hour window. For a strict 48-hour window, the holidaymakers did not leave their pocket watches at home. Instead, they carried them in their waistcoats with an even greater sense of hypervigilance. Every moment of relaxation had to be calculated, scheduled, and aggressively consumed before the absolutist forced them back into the machine. Forced them back into the machine. The pocket watch had successfully completed its conquest, turning even the concept of human leisure into an efficient, highly structured industry that left the individual profoundly exhausted before the new week had even begun. The transformation of human leisure into a highly structured, time-budgeted industry during the late Motkin the last escape route for the human psyche. Effectively closed, canned, mazed, forcing the population to seek internal coping mechanisms to survive within the synchronized grid. It was during this specific historical window that medical catalogues and urban apothecary shops began to notice a massive, unprecedented surge in the consumption of chemical stimulants and nerve sedatives. In the crowded commercial streets of London and Edinburgh, clerks, telegraph operators, and middle management directors, individuals whose entire professional survival flocked and transmission of global data, flocked to counter displays filled ver, kep, tehat, patent, medicines engineered to artificially manage human exhaustion. The most notorious of these substances, widely marketed under the names of nerve tonics or brain elixirs, were heavily laced with raw opium, alcohol, and early chemical derivatives explicitly designed to suppress the body's natural signals of fatigue. This chemical intervention marked a profound, deeply disturbing milestone in the history of human ecology. The pocket watch had successfully accelerated the pace of social and economic life to such an extreme degree that the organic human biology could no longer bridge the gap through sheer willpower alone. To remain useful to the machine, the individual had to systematically alter their own internal chemistry, using liquid sedatives at night to force a compressed, unnatural block of sleep and violent chemical stimulants in the morning to whip their tired nervous system back into alignment with the factory clock, because the human being was no longer operating as a living creature in a natural habitat. Heck, it was being treated, and was treating itself as a piece of damp biological machinery that required constant chemical lubrication to prevent its gears from seizing under the unyielding pressure of the Mutspasher's gold chronometer. As you allow the profound weight of this historical reality, you can feel a deep, comforting wave of validations wash over your entire body. Nonetheless, the exhaustion you feel at the end of a modern day is not a personal failure, nor is it a sign of weakness. It is the natural biological response to an artificial, hyper-accelerated environment that was systematically engineered to override your natural boundaries. Not me. In the absolute safety of your dark room tonight, you are completely permitted to wash your hands of that exhausting struggle. There are no deadlines to meet here, no chemical stimulants required to maintain your pace, and no supervisor checking the efficiency of your resting hours. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we are dedicated to building a calm harbour, can be completely brought to a halt, allowing your mind to sink back into the deep, the so Leopold appeals circular safety of the ancient night. If this journey into the hidden truths of the past is helping you untangle your thoughts, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your quiet support ensures that this peaceful sanctuary remains open for everyone who needs to reclaim their own time. By the arrival of the Mot Tam Chin Gay, this to the formal institutional pacing led to the formal institutionalization of the modern corporate office routine. The old mercantile houses, where merchants had once conducted business over long, casual cups of coffee and handwritten letters that took weeks to cross the ocean, were completely replaced by streamlined corporate headquarters, dominated by the mechanical clatter of the early typewriter and the wall-mounted regulator clock. In these modern spaces, every clerk was assigned a specific, standardized desk, and their movements were monitored by a new class of professional efficiency experts who carried specialized stopwatches capable of measuring human motion to the fraction of a second. The pocket watch had successfully finalized its historical evolution, transitioning from an exclusive luxury item of the aristocracy into an omnipresent industrial weapon that held the entire global workforce in a state of perpetual, unyielding synchronization from which there was no longer any escape under the sun. The institutionalization of the efficiency expert, equipped with a precise stopwatch, transformed the interior life of the corporate workspace into a highly pressurized laboratory of human mechanics. By the early Mean Time, this relentless drive for microscopic time optimization expanded its reach from the administrative plants of the manufacturing sectors into the grand assembly manufacturing sectors. It was during this period that the early philosophies of scientific management began to harden into absolute corporate doctrine. Workers were no longer viewed as skilled craftsmen who possessed an intuitive, artistic understanding of their trade. They were systematically redefined as a collection of muscular movements that could be timed, streamlined, and accelerated. Every single gesture, the picking up of an iron bolt, the turning of a heavy wrench, the shifting of a wooden crate, was subjected to thousands of repetitive stopwatch trials, creating a standard of physical performance that left absolutely no room for human variance. A deep breath, or a momentary pause to wipe the sweat from a brow. This extreme optimization of physical movement introduced an entirely new insidious form of psychological alienation among the urban workforce. In the large machine shops of Leeds and Newcastle, labourers found themselves trapped in a state of hyper-vigilant automation, their limbs performing the identical fraction of a second gestures thousands of times a day under the watchful eye of a floor manager who stood vacapite hat, his pocket watch exposed in his palm. The work was no longer a meaningful process of creation. It was a desperate, unceasing struggle to stay ahead of the sweeping second hand. If a worker's speed dropped by a fraction of a percent over the course of an afternoon, they were instantly identified by the data sheets as a point of industrial waste, a broken cog in the corporate engine that had to be immediately corrected or discarded. The pocket watch had successfully stripped the human hand of its dignity, turning the ancient artistry of labour into a cold, mechanical penalty that wore away the bones and the spirit of the generation that endured its unyielding discipline. As you lie listening to this history unfold from the absolute unmonitored safety of your own quiet space tonight, you can feel a deep settling wave of liberation vercaper et hat through your limbs. The darkness of your bedroom does not contain any efficiency experts tracking your movements, and there are no stopwatches calculating the value of your still form. Here, in the absolute honesty of the night, you are permitted to completely drop every standard of performance, to release every expectation of productivity, and to simply exist in a state of unpunished, non-negotiable rest. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we seek to provide a gentle sanctuary where that modern momentum can be safely brought to a complete halt, helping your nervous system dismantle the chronic tension of the day. If this deep dive into the hidden realities of the past is helping you untangle your mind and prepare your body for sleep, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a soft like on this audio. Your quiet presence ensures that this peaceful resting place remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized race. By the middle of the Mort Tam Chim Yigay, this systemic commodification of seconds began to reshape the very language of human anxiety. It was during this decade that the phrase time is money ceased to be a simple philosophical metaphor and became a literal, legal description of everyday existence. The pocket watch had successfully managed to map an invisible financial grid over every single moment of the human day, converting the simple act of living into a continuous, high-stakes budget transaction. To allow a single hour to slip past without a verifiable productive output was now treated as a form of personal bankruptcy, a moral failure that left the individual harboring a constant, low-grade alarm within their own thoughts. But the expansive, timeless peace that had once allowed the human spirit to rest deeply within the natural rhythm locked away, leaving in its place a highly synchronized, exhausted global society that carried the instrument of its own containment tucked firmly inside its waistcoat pocket. The complete financialization of the hour during the mid-Mort Tam Chinkins Mies prepared the ground for the global expansion of temporal standardization, the formal elimination of geographic time itself. For centuries, even as railways and factories forced local towns to adopt into synchronized community, still recognized that the earth was a vast, naturally rotating sphere where dawn arrived at different moments on different horizons. When a ship sailed across the open Atlantic, the captain would adjust his high-grade marine chronometer daily by observing the highest point of the sun at noon, allowing the rhythm of the vessel to remain in perfect harmony with the actual mechanics of the cosmos. The oceans remained a wild, unmeasured frontier where the natural boundaries of the planet still held sway over the mathematical ambitions of human industry. However, in October Motnin Tamtand Ki, too, an international gathering of diplomats, astronomers, and corporate railway directors conference had convened in Washington, D.C. for the International Meridian. Their explicit goal was to dismantle this remaining natural variation and divide the entire planet into 24 rigid, identical time zones, all measured directly from the prime meridian line running through the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. So, by the late Motnin Tam Chim Yigay, this diplomatic blueprint had hardened into absolute global law. One by one, the independent nations of the earth, from the ancient empires of Asia to the young republics of the Americas, were forced to abandon their native, solar methods of tracking the day. The infinite, curving surface of the globe was wrapped in an invisible grid of mathematical calculation, ensuring that the ticking of a pocket watch in a London boardroom would dictate the exact moment of commerce, transit, and labour in every corner of the civilized world. As you allow your body to relax deeply into the soft, protected warmth of your bed tonight, you can feel a profound sense of peace knowing that you have completely stepped off that global grid. Walk. The dark sanctuary of your room does not obey international time zones, corporate schedules, or global market demands. Here, the passage of the night is entirely pure, returned to its ancient non-judgmental state without a single thought for the morning clock. Without a single thought for the morning clock. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we are dedicated to preserving this calm harbour, creating a restful oasis where the heavy connectivity can be safely laid down. If this journey into the hidden structures of our history is helping you find a sense of true comfort and release, or leaving a soft like on this audio, consider subscribe on this channel. Your quiet engagement helps ensure that this peaceful resting place remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized world. By the turn of the 20th century, this global synchronization had successfully transformed the very nature of human awareness, embedding a chronic state of temporal hypervigilance into the collective mind. Human beings no longer lived within the generous circular safety of the seasons. They lived within a fragile, split-second linear line that was constantly rushing toward a deadline. The pocket watch, which had begun its life as a delicate mechanical marvel, meant to fascinate the courts of Renaissance princes, had ultimately achieved a total, unchallenged conquest over the human spirit. It had re-engineered the factory, colonized the home, synchronized the schools, and mapped an invisible financial cage over the deepest rhythms of human rest. The ancestral peace that had once allowed humanity to exist in effortless harmony with the rolling earth was completely buried beneath a mountain of brass gears, locking society within a permanent, non-subbocund, with a anxious march into a modern future where the clock would never be permitted to stop again. The arrival of the 20th century did not bring a reprieve from this mechanical discipline. Instead, it witnessed the ultimate physical transformation of the timekeeper itself, moving the instrument of control from the hidden depth of the waistcoat pocket directly onto the naked flesh of the human body. For generations, the pocket had required a conscious, deliberate gesture to exert its authority. A person had to actively reach into their clothing, grasp the gold or silver disc, and lift it to their eyes to read the hour. This small physical barrier allowed for occasional moments of psychological escape, brief interludes where a labourer or a clerk could look out a window and forget the exact placement of the hands. But as the frantic logistics of the early morning machines intensified, particularly within the fast-moving environments of military coordination and industrial aviation, this brief gesture was condemned by efficiency experts as a dangerous, wasteful delay. This drive for split-second optimization gave rise to the widespread adoption of the modern wristwatch, an innovation that permanently altered the sensory relationship between human biology and mechanical time. Originally dismissed by late Victorian society as a passing novelty, yet the wristwatch would co-decade of the new set century during the first decade revival into an indispensable tool of survival. By strapping the white enamel dial directly onto the wrist with a leather band, the architects of the modern world succeeded in fusing the machine with the human body. The ticking of the gears was no longer muffled by layers of wool and silk. It was pressed firmly against the skin, its rhythmic vibrations echoing through the radial artery. The clock face was now a permanent, unavoidable fixture of the visual field, ensuring that every movement of the hand, every gesture of greeting, and every moment of rest was instantly and automatically contextualized by the unyielding progression of the seconds. As you lie perfectly still within the deep, unmonitored comfort of your own bed tonight, you can consciously choose to unstrap every heavy burden from your awareness. The space around your pillow is entirely free from those visible dials and pressed mechanisms, and there are no structural demands tracking the movement of your breathings or the depth of your. In this dark sanctuary, time is completely returned to its original fluid state, a soft can drift away from the tracks of modern performance. Softs of modern performance. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we are dedicated to building a calm harbour where the frantic momentum of the outer world can be safely brought to a complete halt, with allowing your nervous system to remember the ancient restorative peace that existed before the urn steel was bound in leather and steel. If this deep journey into the hidden realities of our past is helping you find a sense of true comfort tonight, or leaving a gentle like on this audio, or your quiet support ensures that this peaceful oasis remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized race. By the time the global industrial economies reached their full modernization, this bodily fusion of timekeeping completed the psychological enclosure of the human spirit. The wristwatch had successfully eliminated the final psychological distance between the citizen and the schedule, transforming the individual into their own permanent overseer. A person walking through the streets or resting in their parlour no longer needed to look up at a civic tower or wait for a factory horn to verify their duty. They carried the absolute authority of the global market, a constant, silent reminder of deadlines, appointments, and commercial transactions that could never be ignored. The expansive, timeless peace that had once allowed the human soul to float effortlessly within the generous cycles of the ancient earth had been completely captured and mechanized, leaving humanity to navigate the infinite landscape of existence within the narrow, unyielding track of a wristbound future that would never allow for a single moment of true uncalculated freedom. The physical anchoring of the wristwatch to the human pulse, setting the stage for the ultimate industrial transformation of the 20th century. Mikan Puanmori, in the assembly line. By the Mortinchi Murgay, manufacturing pioneers of the stopwatch, and embedded them directly into the architectural layout of the factory floor. No longer did the worker move around a stationary object at their own natural pace. Instead, a motorized conveyor belt carried the product past speed at an unyielding, pre-calculated speed. This meant that the mechanical clock was no longer merely an abstract dial on the wall or a quiet tick. Against the wrist, it had become a physical, grinding force that actively dragged the human body along with it, requiring an uninterrupted machine-like velocity that punished even a single second of hesitation with immediate systemic failure. This extreme automation of human labor initiated a profound shift in the psychological definition of fatigue. In these modern, hyper-optimized plants, the ancient concept of natural exhaustion, the healthy, heavy tiredness that comes from a long day of varied physical exertion, was replaced by a jagged, systemic nervous tension, because the assembly line demanded an unceasing focus on a single fraction of a second task. The human brain was forced to remain in a state of permanent, high-alert vigilance. The worker could not look away, could not alter their posture, and could not adjust their rhythm to accommodate a momentary cramp or a deep restorative breath. The pocket watch and its wrist-bound descendants had succeeded in turning the human nervous system into a direct extension of the factory generator, generating an unprecedented epidemic of industrial neurosis that left an entire generation structurally broken before the evening whistle ever blew. As you rest your head deeply within the soft, supportive comfort of your dark room tonight, you can feel an immense wave of relief, knowing that the grinding conveyor of the modern world has completely stopped for you. The space around your bed does not demand an unyielding pace, and there are no motorized belts or tracking systems monitoring the efficiency of your movements. In this unmonitored sanctuary, you are permitted to let your body fully let go, allowing your breathing to slow down rhythm into a deep circular to you, not entirely to you. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we strive to build a calm harbour where that relentless, linear momentum can be completely brought to a halt, helping your mind reclaim the ancient, uncalculated peace that existed long before the world was forced to live by the second. If this journey into the hidden realities of our history is helping you find a true scent to the channel, or leaving a gentle like on this audio, your quiet engagement ensures that this peaceful oasis remains open for all who seek an escape from the synchronized race. By the time this industrial philosophy reached its peak, it had permanently altered the interior landscape of the human night. The workers who returned to their tenement homes after a shift on the assembly line found that they could not simply switch off the high-alert vigilance that had been forced upon them during the day. The rhythmic, unrelenting pace of the conveyor belt continued to turn within their minds, long after the factory gates had closed, transforming the hours of darkness into a restless extension of the workspace. Sleep was no longer a natural surrender to the quiet shadows of the earth. It had become an anxious, highly pressured race to repair the body before the morning alarm summoned them back to the line. The machine had successfully colonized the subconscious mind itself, locking humanity within a permanent, synchronized loop of production and recovery that stripped the night of its sacred character and left the modern soul mechanical forever within the narrow track of a mechanical future. As this long historical journey through the mechanical landscape draws to its inevitable conclusion, we find ourselves standing at the edge of the modern era, looking back across the centuries at the quiet world we left behind. The transformation that began with a delicate, clicking marvel in the private chambers of Renaissance princes has successfully completed its global march, leaving no corner of the earth untouched by its unyielding law, the natural expansive cycles of the ancient sun, the slow and healing winters of our ancestors, and the deep fragmented rest of the countryside have all been systematically folded into a single global network of absolute mathematical precision. Humanity has built a magnificent, hyper-synchronized civilization of metal and glass, but in doing so, we have traded away the native sovereignty of our own bodies, carrying the heavy weights and the anxious alarms of the marketplace directly within our own spirits. Yet, as you lie here now, enveloped by the immense non-judgmental darkness of your own room tonight, you hold the ultimate power to quietly dissolve that entire historical cage. The room around you does not require you to perform to produce or to align your breathing with a synchronized dial. In this soft and boundless sanctuary, the global grid completely breaks down, and the relentless march of the modern clock is forcefully brought to an absolute, permanent halt. Here, at the final threshold of the night, time is no longer a linear line rushing toward a stressful deadline. It is restored to its original sacred state, a wide circular ocean of complete, unpunished peace where your consciousness is permitted to drift entirely free from the tracks of efficiency. On this channel, Whispers of Centuries, we have travelled through these deep shadows of the past together to help you untangle your mind from the hyper-vigilant pace of the modern race, providing a calm and protected harbour where your nervous system can safely lay down its heavy armour. If this immersion into the forgotten realities of our histories has brought a true sense of comfort to your limbs and prepared your body for a deep, restorative rest, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a gentle like on this audio. Your quiet engagement ensures that this peaceful oasis remains open for every weary mind seeking an escape from the machine. Let the final remnants of the world completely fade into the dark now. Let your shoulders drop, let your thoughts dissolve into the soft shadows of the mattress, and surrender entirely to the timeless, beautiful comfort of the night, in and out, as you sink into a deep, unhurried, and everlasting sleep.